In episode 2, Michael and I discuss a wide range of topics, including working with John Williams on his concerto for trumpet and orchestra, second trumpet player David Zauder, who was a real mentor to Michael, and how being a student today has changed from when he was a student. Did you do the premiere in Cleveland with John Williams conducting?
Doc Nonning was conducting, but John was there.
Okay. And I assume if it took him about 2 years to write the piece, he was writing that during the time he was writing a number of movie scores as well.
Oh, yeah. Actually, when I first started seeing him, he was working on Schindler's List, and I remember him sitting at the piano playing the theme from Schindler's List for me.
Really? Oh, wow.
Which was just, I sat there with my jaw on the ground. It's just like, oh my God. I didn't, of course I didn't like, fawn over him like some fan or something, but I thought to myself, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's just incredible. And he started talking about, with violin and how this was going to work and everything. And what I didn't know at that time, of course, I found out later, I knew that David Zauder was a survivor of the Holocaust, but what I didn't know is that Zauder was one of Spielberg's main resources for that movie, because Zauder had been in that same camp that Schindler's took the people out of.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
Not Sovaborg or whatever the camp was. Yeah, and that 4 of Zauder's actual stories are in the movie.
Wow. Amazing.
Of what he actually witnessed and experienced.
Do you remember which
stories
were in the movie?
I know. I'm pretty certain 2 of them were when the little kids were hiding in the sewer, in the sewage.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of them. And when the woman who was an architect was telling them that they were building the thing wrong, and the commandant shot her and killed her, and then said, do what she said.
Wow.
But shot her because she was speaking to them.
And he experienced that.
He experienced both of those, I believe, yeah. And there were 2 other things he experienced. But Dave rarely talked about it. There were just a couple of times, actually after the movie came out, I just kind of asked him about it. One time we were on tour and we had both, it was a big tour and we had a day off. And we went out for a couple drinks after the show and we were walking back and he just started talking about it. And he talked about it very matter-of-factly. I'll never forget, he was talking about the commandant, in the movie it's a little bit different, that the commandant in the movie wasn't living on campus. And I'm thinking, on campus, oh my God. Just the way he was speaking about it. But he spoke about his parents and being separated from his mom and, scratching the number and changing the number on his arm, which saved him from going straight into the gas chamber and ending up going into the work. And how he believed he was born in 1931. Mm-hmm. Up until he was what he thought was 78. And his daughter, through the Shoah Project and the Holocaust Museum, found out that he was actually born in 1928. And that by scratching the number and changing the number, his mother convincing him that he was 3 years younger than he actually was, then he ended up going into the workforce rather than into the gas chamber.
Yeah, because a lot of people think. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say it's an incredible story that he was able to survive that.
A lot of people think that concentration camps are just for killing people, but there were concentration camps, and then there were extermination camps, and then certain camps were concentration and extermination camps. I mean, Auschwitz was the most famous coupling of those 2. So,
and that's where that's where DZ ended up at the end of the war when he was liberated. I remember him talking about riding out of Auschwitz on a tank.
Wow.
And then he ended up coming here when he thought he was 15. He was really 18. But he came here and then he connected with Leonard B. Smith in Detroit. And Leonard B. Smith took him under his wing. And he actually started playing cornet when he was 17.
Boy, I tell you, the recording he has of the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet, where he plays cornet, is
Oh,
really, really beautiful.
Sensational.
Yeah.
Oh, that is the standard. And what was interesting when I first got in the orchestra was that, well, Dave was hired by Zell as a cornet specialist. And Dave always played all the principal cornet parts. So anytime the Berlioz, the Tchaikovsky, any of the two cornet, two trumpets, any of that stuff, the Stravinsky, other than Petrushka, any of that stuff, Dave always played principal cornet. So he played all that stuff my first 9 years. And, my whole feeling with that was that, man, I got to sit there and hear this like guy who was trained this very specific way that is kind of the last of the Mohicans. And to get to hear him play like the Obbligato and the Fantastique, to get him play all the Tchaikovsky stuff, get him to hear him play Romeo and Juliet and sitting next to him, a few times. It was a great learning experience for me. Just, a very particular way that he had it with his articulation and his sound production, and, that the cornet really had a very, very different color palette than the trumpet. And the way he approached it in his airstream and his articulation was very distinctive and very uniquely different than what he did on the trumpet. And that's something that I think is lost a little bit nowadays. A lot of guys, when you hear two cornets, two trumpet in the orchestra, either people just play it all on trumpet or they play cornets that are basically sound like trumpets. And to me, what I got from Dave is if you're going to do the two cornet, two trumpet thing, man, Bizet, Franck, Berlioz, Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev, they had a very distinct sound, a very distinct orientation of the mix that, in order to really adhere to the composer's wishes, the two cornets, two trumpets have to be very distinct in their own right because of the way the cornets kind of become another woodwind instrument here and there, or that they're more of a lyrical instrument. The trumpets are a little more of a rhythmic instrument, or, however these guys use them, that, you need to stay with that acumen. So when we do two cornets, two trumpets now, it's very distinct, and we use Shepard's quick cornets and, different, these kind of deeper, more cornetty mouthpieces as well.
I remember you, speaking of David Zauder, a story you told me years ago that you might want to relate now. I think it's a great story about the first year you did, I think in the orchestra, you did Ein Heldenleben, and you went off stage and you were looking at the TV screen to get cues. You can take it from there.
Yeah. So this was in April, and we're doing Heldenleben with Ashkenazi, and I get off stage with Dave Zauder, who's playing second, and Jim Darling was playing third B flat. And I get off stage with him, and it's mid-April, and they look at each other, and Dave reaches forward and goes click, click, click on the TV set, and all of a sudden the Indians game is on. The Indians baseball game is on. And they're watching the Indians game, and I'm hearing on stage.
Instead of the conductor.
Instead of the conductor. And I hear this, it's kind of getting in there. And they're both sitting there with their arms folded looking at me. Like, what are you going to do? And I'm just looking at them and I looked at Dave finally and was like, I can't play until you start it, because the second trumpet comes in first. Yeah. And it's, I'm counting it down. About 2 bars out, Zauder leans forward and just goes click, click, click. Ashkenazi's back on, and then off we go.
Yeah, that's great.
Then they wanted to see my reaction. Then fast forward 2 years, we're doing Heldenleben on tour on the West Coast in Tucson with Dochnani. And the camera for the offstage guys to be able to see Dochnani is positioned right behind the percussion section. So Jim Darling was very, very close friends with Rich Weiner, a wonderful principal percussionist who unfortunately just passed away. Was really funny guy, real character, and great player, wonderful musician and teacher. And so anyhow, we're off stage with Zauder and Darling, and all of a sudden Rich Weiner stands up and he moves over and he positions his head literally right in front of and blocking the camera. So we can't see Dochnani. And Zauder's off stage, and Zauder had this waxed mustache, and whenever he got kind of either pissed off or just kind of angry or frustrated, he would start spreading his mustache with his thumb and index finger from his right hand, and he'd be either spreading his mustache. He's like, "God damn it, Rich, get the F out of the way, bleep out, God damn it," And Jim is losing his mind. Jim is hyperventilating, laughing, and then the same kind of thing about about 3 bars before, and you could see Rich's shoulders kind of going up and down. He's laughing.
Uh-huh.
Rich moves out of the way. You could see the entire percussion section and Paul Jančić, our timpani player, just laughing.
That's great.
Doc Noddy, you could see this giant grin on his face. He's laughing.
So he knew about it too, or he just had an idea?
He saw what was happening, and he's laughing. and Zauder came plowing in on that first thing, and Zauder was a very strong player. I mean, he was an animal. I mean, he was a very strong, cultivated but strong player who had a very percussive articulation when needed and wanted. And he came bombing in on that on the concert B flats.
Yeah.
Oh man, I thought he was going to blow the stage down. I mean, it was really funny. I mean, and Jim is shaking; he could barely play.
That's great.
But the thing is, what that to me, what that's about, man. You got to have fun doing this, and you got to keep it in perspective that we go into a piece of metal for a living, and.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I have to say is that the trumpet for me has always been fun. I got started because I wanted to do it. I kept doing it because it was fun. I wanted to become a trumpet player for a living because I enjoyed it. And I know it's cliche and it sounds corny, but I really truthfully, honestly feel this way, that I love what I do more than I ever have now. Every time I get to play, I love it even more. And I've been extraordinarily fortunate to do something that I enjoy this much, have this much fun with. And again, I'm just a frustrated athlete. I'm just, when I'm playing a concert, it's like an athlete playing a game.
So if you were going to play something, if you could transport yourself to be a great athlete, what sport?
Oh, baseball. I'd love to play for the Dodgers.
Really?
I would have loved to have been an outfielder for the Dodgers.
Oh,
would have
outfield.
loved it.
Okay, which position in outfield?
Probably either left or right.
Okay, and
I played center a little bit. 3, 4, or 5 is usually what I usually was when I was playing a lot. That's usually I was like a 3, 4, 5 hitter.
Okay. So more so than
that.
Basketball, for example.
Basketball at 5'7" wasn't going to happen anymore. Basketball wasn't going to happen anymore for me than for you, my friend.
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
That unless I was playing in the 5'10" and under league for UCLA intramural. Other than that, basketball wasn't happening. No.
Yeah. Okay.
But no, baseball was always my love, and that some of that comes from my mom and a little bit of my dad, mostly my mom. And they both grew up in Brooklyn, rooting for the Dodgers and going to Ebbets Field. And my mom was actually at the Bobby Thompson home run game at the Polo Grounds.
Really? Wow.
Yep. She was at the Thompson home run game in '51.
I read a book about Willie Mays, and he was on deck in his first year when Thompson hit that home run. And they said the difference between that first year and the second year was Willie Mays was on deck thinking, please do something so I don't have to go to bat. And then the second year is like he wanted it to be at bat. That was the difference, the transition between his first and second year. Yeah,
I've heard an interview and read that as well. That he was on deck hoping just like please do something so I don't have to be that guy.
Exactly.
The next season is like, please let me be that guy.
Yeah.
But a lot of that, it's why with students I encourage them, like, the more performance and the more playing. And you did this for me. You took me along on some gigs. You got me, playing opportunities. I was doing a lot of playing, and at that point, YMF Debut Orchestra and American Youth Symphony in Los Angeles. I was playing in a brass quintet with Alex Isles, a wonderful trombone player in the studios now, is magnificent. I was playing with these great players, and I was doing all the playing I possibly could, and that I feel like a lot of players now, they practice their excerpts, they can play the stuff great, but ensemble skills, playing with others, really being able to hear and mimic things is something that, a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between now and when I first got in the Cleveland Orchestra? And I would say that's the biggest difference, is that I feel like there was kind of this sense that people could listen to each other and pick up little nuances and be able to immediately play them back. Whereas now it's a little more formulaic and a little more learned rather than something that's more instinctual. And I don't know how much of that is a sociological thing, and I seem, I've talking to a lot of people over this COVID time about this particular subject. I'd be curious what you think, Tony. But for me, a lot of it, I think, is that for us getting recordings, I remember you'd assign me Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, and you would hand me an LP of Reiner Chicago and Zell Cleveland. Say, here, listen to these two things. And I would sit there and listen to it, and I would read the back cover, and I would read about these stories and read about these people and read about the piece. Now these kids are going on Spotify, and whatever's the first thing that pops up, they'll grab it. And it's not like they've got the CD booklet or the back of the LP or any of that sort of, backstory and context to be able to bring them into that world. It's just kind of a one-dimensional, here's the piece, I'm listening to it, okay, fine. And it could be a great orchestra, it could be some schlock orchestra that, it's not probably the best example, to listen to as a role model. And so I feel like there's a lot of, access to information is much easier, much quicker, and much more just wide range of stuff accessible than it was maybe 30, 40 years ago. But the way we digest it is different. And so I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting to me being over here in Europe, because in Europe it's, in a way, and this is really perhaps way too much of a generalization, but I'd say it's even worse than in the United States. I've had times, well, let me just mention one time at a particular school where I was teaching that will remain nameless, where I had the students turn their backs so they could not see what was being played. And this was a room full of the 30 brass students at this particular academy. And not one of 30 students could identify the beginning of Petrushka or the beginning of Beethoven's Ninth. Not one horn player could identify the beginning of the first movement of Tchaikovsky Fifth. Trumpet players could not identify the Allegro of Leonore III from Beethoven. Trombone players could not identify the first movement of the Rhenish Symphony. And so, in Europe, I think it tends to be, and maybe in the United States, where students now are just practicing the excerpts, and they know the excerpts, but they have no context for the piece. And it's, for me, the same thing with you. When we were growing up, it was the love of the piece. That one day I hope I get to play the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra or the Schumann Third or whatever piece it is. But I think for a lot of students, it's just learning the excerpts and they don't really know the piece. And so I find that to be really discouraging, actually. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but that's
no.
me.
It's very much the same. The thing is, I feel like players now, a lot of these younger guys, they got better technique than I could ever imagine having.
Yeah, for sure.
Having. God, I can't even speak English. They have better technique than I could ever imagine having right now. But the context, like you say, not knowing the whole piece, for me, when I learned excerpts, I learned the whole piece. And that's still the way I teach. I have the kids learn the whole piece because there could be something that the oboe does or the violas do or the violins do 20 bars before that informs how you need to play that.
Right.
And that's something that awareness, and then when you're in the orchestra, watching violinists play, watching their bow arrière, watching the way violinists use vibrato, watching the way wind players phrase things, and watching their body language and the way they use vibrato and different things and the way things get passed around the orchestra and hearing something. And, I like to, discuss it in a way that it's like it's akin to a relay race. Like the baton is the melody and that's getting passed around. And then when you take it smoothly from somebody, and then it goes to the next person, and you pass it. You don't drop it or throw it. You pass it, while holding it. And it's very, to me, there's a stark contrast between those that think that way and listen that way and can hear that way, and those that don't. And I try to teach in a way to try to encourage that kind of sense. It's just like, you got to know the whole piece. You got to know the instrumentation. You got to know the context. You've got to understand the style of Bartók or the style of, Stravinsky, and where, how language plays into that, how history plays into that, how, the nationality of where they happen to be at that moment plays into that.
Right, and it shouldn't be homework
at that point.
It shouldn't be like homework.
No.
It should be fun. It should. I mean, wow! I get to hear Bartok Concerto for Orchestra or Ravel Daphnis or whatever.
Yeah, and it's all you have to like look into the language and look into the culture and look into, to me, there's no amount of information that you can never have too much information.
Yep.
That's not possible. There's always more to learn. And I know, again, I'm full of cliches, but I mean, it is very true. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Oh, that's for sure.
And, and that to me is a big driving force that, I mean, I was inspired by you and Mark Gould and, older players and people that I was listening to when I was coming up, that I want to try to be that kind of, person for others and pass that along. And, that to me is a driving force behind, all of music, is that quest for information, that quest for understanding.
Right. And the great works, again, it's like the iceberg thing, you can go deeper and deeper, or a fathomless lake, and deeper and not reach the bottom in terms of the depth of a Bach B minor mass or a Mahler symphony. Right. For example.
Well, the thing is, if with Mahler, you have to understand his mindset and what he was going through at various points of his life and his emotions. And you have to, I've always felt very close with Mahler. I don't know why, I just, from very early on, reading about him, and I just always felt like I identified with him in some way, and I understood him. It's like I get it, and just, understand his emotions. And in Mahler symphonies, to me, inhabiting his emotional being in any of those moments, you have to be able to go to the heights of heroism, to the depths of despair, and everything in between. Sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're just so in love with your wife you could burst. It's sometimes you're just so beside yourself upset. And all these things in between. Sometimes you're really happy at something. And that to me is just, the expression in music is something that early on you and Mark especially, and all the great players I liked and were drawn to, I started seeing that common thread was just everything had this expressiveness, everything had this emotion, everything was saying something. It wasn't just playing the music, you were saying something with the music. And that to me is always the great artist. You listen to, a Maurice Andre, a Håkan, a Wynton, a Wayne Bergeron, an Arturo Sandoval, Phil Smith, Bud Herseth, Mark Gould, Chris Martin, Gabor Tarkovi, and Morris Murphy, Timothy Dorchester. Any of these kind of guys, you hear that in their music making. You hear that in their playing. They're just, the trumpet is just a manifestation of their voice. It's just their voice using that as the vehicle, and that to me it transcends the trumpet. It's about expression and about music. And I feel like too often players, it's like, okay, I'm going to play Leonore 3. No, you have to know the story. You have to know the drama, and all of a sudden off in the distance, it's got that kind of fire. It's got that urgency. It's got that dramatic sort of a call, and it just like, oh my God, it has that sort of, sense to it. It's just not the notes on the page. And that to me is a big difference between really the great players and players who are really good, but not great.
But can play all the notes. But when I was in Malmö, we did the Dvorak Eighth with the conductor, and one of the string players was Czech, and we had a beer afterwards, and I asked him what he thought of the conductor, and he was talking about the conductor, who he liked, and Dvorak. And at one point, he just sort of tossed it off. It was not like a big thing for him. But he said the soul of Dvorak is not in the notes. And that's always stuck with me, that it's so much more than just the notes.
Oh, it's in the language. It's in the culture. It's in, that experience of his at that time.
Yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
that's, that to me, quite honestly, I don't mean to be a geek, but that to me is the fun, is like exploring that, and learning about that, and deepening my understanding of that. Because again, the more informed I am, the more I can bring that to the table, and just, be able to express something that more correctly reflects the composer's wishes.
Yeah, yeah. I know you have to get off to another meeting, but just very quickly, can you think of a performance that stands out in your mind as being like one of the great performances you played in?
It's a hard question because there's a number of them. I mean, I've been extraordinarily fortunate to, ride the bus with the Cleveland Orchestra for the last 32 years, and be surrounded by, this kind of an entity and organization and the people on stage who are just unbelievably inspiring. The one performance that stands out to me above all the others was a Mahler's Eighth Symphony in Carnegie Hall with Robert Shaw in 1995. And Carnegie Hall was doing all the Mahler symphonies, and the last one that was going to be done was number 8. And we did it in Cleveland. And then when we got to Carnegie, I believe it was the Cleveland Orchestra Chorus, Cincinnati Symphony Chorus, and the Atlanta Symphony Chorus. And we had this giant chorus on stage behind us. And funny enough, Sylvia McNair, who was very close to Robert Shaw, just wanted to be part of it. And all of a sudden, Sylvia's right behind me.
Wow. Okay.
In the chorus, and singing in the chorus. Mm-hmm. She wasn't one of the solos. She's in the chorus. And,
pretty good chorus.
It wasn't bad. Anyhow, in Carnegie, there's the lower level, and then there's the 2 levels of boxes, and then the 2 balconies. And Shaw had this giant chorus on stage, but then the rest of the chorus was in the 2 levels of the boxes. And I will never forget, somehow he had I don't know how he did it, but he had a time so like everything came together. When that chorus opened up, like in the first few moments of that piece, you had that giant chord, and then, Vanny, whatever
right.
the words are, and that chorus opened up. It was like, oh my God. I'd never heard any. It was like nothing I'd ever heard in my life. And my wife Yolanda happened to be at that show, and we got her seats about 3/4 of the way back on the bottom floor. And she said, just being surrounded by the chorus and everything, she was like in the perfect spot where everything met. And she said she's never heard anything before or since like that. Right. And it was one of those performances right from the first notes we played. I know this sounds silly, but I just thought to myself, game on.
Uh-huh.
It's just, it's one of the, after the first couple licks, at the first stanzas, we had a little bit of rest, and I just looked at Zauder and he looked at me, and we just kind of just gave each other a nod, just like, all right, let's go.
Yeah. Let's enjoy this.
And let's go. Great. And it's just one of those things where it's just everything, like everybody was on. I mean, that feeling, those few moments when everything's on, it just has that pop. Everything has that razor sharp kind of a pop to it all. And man, that was one of the most emotional concerts and most satisfying concerts. I mean, I just remember ending that and just thinking that was unbelievable. And Ryan Anthony was part of that. He was in the box in the back with the offstage guys with Jim Darling playing high D's from God back there. I mean, both of those guys. It was just, because Ryan had a great high range. Jim Darling had a freak high range. Jim was one of those guys. He didn't warm up. He'd just take it out and start playing. And you could give him the doggiest German B-flat rotary and say, here, Jim, play me a double C. Just weep, and he'd crank out a double C.
Really?
Night or day, anytime, no warm up. And it just had his freak high range. So he's back there playing these high Ds with Ryan that were just ungodly fantastic. So I've got that coming at me, and we're playing back toward them. And I mean, just that whole moment in that space was one of the most electric, incredible moments. I mean, there have been some others. I mean, there was a Mahler 5 in Salzburg. There was a Mahler 3 in one in the Musikverein and one in London Royal Albert Hall. There was a performance of Elektra that we did here in Cleveland with Franz. There was, playing Rite of Spring with Boulez.
Yeah, I would think anything with Boulez would be great.
I mean, any of this stuff. I mean, there's just so many things I could throw at you. My first performance playing Bruckner 9 was the first concert that I ever played with the Cleveland Orchestra.
Wow.
Playing Bruckner. Actually, that first week was playing Bruckner 9 and recording it, which is crazy.
If you'd like to hear more of my conversation with Michael, please go to the bonus room, where we will talk about teaching and trumpet hierarchy and the different styles of playing. We also talk about Tom Stevens and finally our lessons together when Michael was a young student.